The cold wind brushed against Rachel's face as she adjusted her son Ethan's scarf, her hands trembling slightly from both the chill and the weight of her thoughts. Life as a single mother had never been easy, but Rachel had always found a way to push through. For her, it wasn't about herself anymore. It was about Ethan, her bright-eyed, curious 7-year-old who deserved a better life than the one she was barely holding together. Today was different, though. Today, Rachel was starting a new job. It wasn't glamorous, and it wasn't something she had ever imagined herself doing, but it paid better than her shifts at the diner, and that was all that mattered. She had been hired to care for the wounds of a man she had never met. Nathaniel was a name she had heard before, whispered in news stories and business magazines. He had once been a charismatic figure, a man who seemed to have it all: wealth, charm, and a life most people could only dream of. But after a tragic accident 2 years ago, he had disappeared from the public eye, retreating into the shadows of his sprawling estate. Rachel didn't know what to expect. The agency had told her that Nathaniel needed someone trustworthy and gentle, someone who could handle the job without prying into his personal life. She wasn't sure if she was the right person for the task, but she didn't have the luxury of turning it down. Little did Rachel know this job would change everything. It would challenge her in ways she never imagined, and uncover parts of herself and Nathaniel that had long been hidden. This is a story about healing, connection, and the unexpected ways life can bring people together. Rachel's mornings always started the same way. Early, chaotic, and filled with a sense of urgency, she would wake up before the sun, quietly slipping out of bed to prepare breakfast for Ethan. The small apartment they lived in was far from luxurious, but Rachel had done her best to make it feel like home. The walls were adorned with Ethan's crayon drawings, and the shelves were lined with secondhand books she had collected over the years. As she packed Ethan's lunch, a peanut butter sandwich and an apple, her mind raced with the endless list of responsibilities she had to juggle. Rent was due in a week, the electricity bill was overdue, and her hours at the diner had been cut again. She glanced at Ethan, who was sitting at the table, happily munching on his cereal, completely unaware of the weight his mother carried every day. It hadn't always been this way. Rachel's life had taken a sharp turn 7 years ago when she found out she was pregnant. At the time, she had been in a relationship with Mark, a man she thought she could build a future with. But when she told him about the baby, he walked away without a second thought, leaving her to face the challenges of single motherhood alone. Since then, Rachel had worked tirelessly to provide for Ethan. She had taken on every job she could find, waitressing, cleaning houses, even babysitting, just to make ends meet. There were nights when she cried herself to sleep, overwhelmed by the loneliness and exhaustion, but she never let Ethan see her break. To him, she was strong, unshakable, and always there to protect him. But lately, things had been getting harder. The bills were piling up faster than she could pay them, and the diner job wasn't enough anymore. That's when she found the ad for the caregiver position. It wasn't something she had experience in, but the agency assured her that the client was looking for someone trustworthy, not necessarily someone with medical training. Rachel had hesitated at first. The idea of working for a billionaire felt surreal, almost laughable, but when she thought about Ethan and the life she wanted to give him, she knew she had to take the chance. As she walked Ethan to the bus stop that morning, she kissed his forehead and whispered, "I'll see you tonight, buddy." He smiled up at her, his eyes full of trust and love, and in that moment, Rachel felt a renewed sense of determination. This job wasn't just about money. It was about giving Ethan the future he deserved. Rachel's heart pounded as the taxi pulled up to the gates of the Carter estate. The sheer size of the property was overwhelming. Sprawling lawns stretched as far as the eye could see, and the mansion itself looked like something out of a movie. Its ivy-covered walls and towering windows gave it an air of both grandeur. She stepped out of the car, clutching her worn coat tightly around her. Her scuffed boots crunched against the gravel driveway as she approached the massive double doors. For a moment she hesitated, feeling completely out of place. This wasn't her world. She was just a single mom trying to make ends meet, and this estate felt like it belonged to another universe entirely. Before she could knock, the door swung open, revealing a stern-looking woman in her late 50s. "You must be Rachel," the woman said briskly, her sharp eyes scanning Rachel from head to toe. "I'm Mrs. Whitmore, the housekeeper. Mr. Carter is waiting for you upstairs. He doesn't like to be kept waiting." Rachel nodded, swallowing her nerves as she stepped inside. The interior of the mansion was just as intimidating as the exterior. High ceilings, marble floors, and an eerie silence that made her footsteps sound far too loud. Mrs. Whitmore led her up a grand staircase, her tone clipped and professional as she explained the rules of the house. "Mr. Carter values his privacy. You are here to do your job and nothing more. Do not ask personal questions, and do not linger in rooms you are not assigned to." When they reached the top of the stairs, Mrs. Whitmore gestured toward a large wooden door. "He's in there," she said, before turning and walking away without another word. Rachel took a deep breath and knocked softly. "Come in," a low, commanding voice called from the other side. She pushed the door open and stepped inside, her eyes immediately drawn to the man sitting by the window. Nathaniel Carter was nothing like she had imagined. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his presence commanding even as he sat in a wheelchair. His face was partially obscured by shadows, but the scar running down his cheek was impossible to miss. It was a stark reminder of the accident that had changed his life. "Are you the nurse?" he asked, his voice edged with skepticism. "I'm Rachel," she replied, forcing her voice to stay steady. "The agency sent me." Nathaniel studied her for a long moment, his piercing blue eyes searching her face as if trying to gauge her intentions. Rachel held his gaze, refusing to flinch under his scrutiny. Finally, he nodded. "Very well, let's get started." The tension in the room was palpable as Rachel set to work, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted the bandages on his arm. Nathaniel didn't say much, his responses curt and businesslike. But Rachel could sense something beneath his cold exterior, a deep sadness, a weight he carried that went far beyond his physical injuries. As she finished her task and prepared to leave, Nathaniel spoke again, his tone softer this time. "Thank you." Rachel paused, surprised by the unexpected gratitude. She nodded and left the room, her mind racing. This job was going to be more challenging than she had anticipated, but something about Nathaniel intrigued her. Beneath the scars and the walls he had built around himself, she sensed there was more to him than met the eye. The first few days at the Carter estate were anything but easy. Rachel quickly realized that Nathaniel Carter was not an easy man to work for. He was distant, guarded, and often curt in his responses. He rarely spoke unless it was necessary, and when he did, his tone was clipped and formal. Rachel spent most of her time tending to his injuries, which were more extensive than she had initially thought. His arms and legs bore deep scars, and his left leg was still healing from a surgery that had left him unable to walk without assistance. The accident that had left him in this state was never discussed, and Rachel knew better than to ask. The silence between them was heavy, almost suffocating at times. Rachel tried to make small talk, hoping to ease the tension, but Nathaniel's responses were always short and dismissive. "Did you always live here?" she asked one afternoon as she carefully changed the bandages on his arm. "Yes," he replied without elaborating. "It's a beautiful house," she continued, trying to keep the conversation going. "It's just a house," he said flatly, his eyes fixed on the window. Rachel bit her lip, deciding it was best to drop the subject. She focused on her work, her hands steady as she cleaned the wound. Despite his cold demeanor, she couldn't help but notice the way Nathaniel watched her when he thought she wasn't looking. There was something in his eyes. Curiosity, perhaps, or maybe even a hint of vulnerability. Outside of her time with Nathaniel, Rachel found herself growing accustomed to the rhythms of the estate. Mrs. Whitmore, though stern, was helpful in showing her around and explaining the rules. The other staff members kept their distance, treating Rachel with polite indifference. At night, Rachel would return to her small apartment, exhausted but grateful for the paycheck that would help her keep a roof over Ethan's head. She would tuck him into bed, listening as he excitedly told her about his day at school. His laughter was a reminder of why she was doing this, why she was enduring the coldness of a man who seemed determined to keep the world at arm's length. But as the days turned into weeks, Rachel began to notice small changes in Nathaniel. He started to ask her questions, simple ones, like how her day had been or if she had eaten lunch. His tone was still guarded, but there was a softness to it that hadn't been there before. One evening, as she was packing up her things to leave, Nathaniel spoke up unexpectedly. "Where do you do this?" he asked, his voice quiet but firm. Rachel paused, caught off guard by the question. "Do what?" "Take care of people. Put up with people like me." She looked at him, her expression thoughtful. "Because everyone deserves to be cared for," she said simply, "even if they don't think they do." Nathaniel didn't respond, but the look in his eyes told Rachel that her words had struck a chord. For the first time, she felt like she was beginning to understand the man behind the walls he had built. As the weeks passed, the icy distance between Rachel and Nathaniel began to thaw. It wasn't an overnight change, but rather a series of small, almost imperceptible moments that slowly brought them closer. Nathaniel started to open up, though cautiously and in fragments. One afternoon, as Rachel was helping him with his physical therapy exercises, he surprised her by asking, "Do you have any family?" Rachel hesitated for a moment before answering. "Just my son, Ethan. He's 7. Smart, curious, and full of energy. He's my whole world." Nathaniel nodded, his expression unreadable. "It must be hard raising him on your own." "It is," Rachel admitted, her voice soft. "But he makes it worth it. Every struggle, every sleepless night, it's all for him." Nathaniel didn't respond right away, but Rachel noticed the way his gaze softened, as if her words had struck a chord. In return, Nathaniel began to share small pieces of his own life. He told her about his love for sailing, something he hadn't done since the accident. He mentioned his late parents, who had left him the estate, and how he had once dreamed of turning it into a place where people could gather and celebrate. But those dreams had died the day of the accident. Rachel didn't press him for details, but she could see the pain in his eyes whenever he mentioned it. It was clear that the scars on his body were nothing compared to the ones he carried inside. One evening, as Rachel was tidying up the room, she noticed a grand piano in the corner, covered in a layer of dust. "You play?" she asked, gesturing toward it. Nathaniel glanced at the piano, his expression darkening. "I used to," he said quietly. Rachel hesitated before walking over to the piano and brushing off the dust. "You should play again," she said gently. "Music has a way of healing, you know." Nathaniel didn't respond, but the next day, Rachel heard faint notes drifting through the halls. She paused outside the room, listening as Nathaniel played a hauntingly beautiful melody. It was the first time she had seen him truly come alive, and it brought a smile to her face. Their bond continued to grow in unexpected ways. Nathaniel began to ask about Ethan, and Rachel would share stories about her son's antics, how he loved to build forts out of blankets, or how he insisted on wearing mismatched socks because he thought it was cool. Nathaniel even surprised Rachel one day by asking if she had a picture of Ethan. She pulled out her phone and showed him a photo of her son, grinning from ear to ear, his front teeth missing. "Looks like a good kid," Nathaniel said, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Ease," Rachel replied, her voice filled with pride. For the first time, Rachel felt like she was seeing the real Nathaniel, the man behind the walls he had built to protect himself. He wasn't just a reclusive billionaire, he was someone who had been deeply hurt, someone who was still trying to find his way back to the world. One afternoon, as Rachel was preparing to leave, Nathaniel stopped her. "Rachel," he said, his voice hesitant, "thank you for everything." Rachel turned to him, surprised by the sincerity in his tone. "You don't have to thank me," she said with a smile. "That's what I'm here for." But deep down, she knew it was more than just a job now. She cared about Nathaniel, not just as her employer, but as a person, and she could see that he was beginning to care about her, too. Just as Rachel and Nathaniel's bond was beginning to deepen, life threw an unexpected curveball. One evening, as Rachel was walking home from the bus stop after her shift, she noticed a familiar figure standing outside her apartment building. Her heart sank. It was Mark, Ethan's father. Rachel hadn't seen Mark in years, not since the day he walked out on her after learning she was pregnant. He looked different now, older, rougher around the edges, but the sight of him still brought back a flood of painful memories. "Rachel," he called out, his voice hesitant. "What are you doing here, Mark?" she asked, her tone sharp as she approached him. I wanted to see you. And Ethan," he said, shoving his hands into his pockets. "I've been thinking a lot about the past, and I want to make things right." Rachel crossed her arms, her eyes narrowing. "You want to make things right? After 7 years of silence? After abandoning us when we needed you the most?" Mark looked down, shame flickering across his face. "I know I messed up, Rachel. I was scared, and I didn't know how to handle it. But I've changed. I have a steady job now, and I want to be part of Ethan's life." Rachel's mind raced. She didn't know what to say. Part of her wanted to slam the door in his face and tell him to leave, but another part of her couldn't ignore the fact that Ethan had always asked about his father. "Ethan doesn't even know you," she said finally, her voice trembling. "You can't just show up out of nowhere and expect to be part of his life." "I'm not asking for much," Mark said. "Just a chance to get to know him, please, Rachel." Rachel sighed, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. "I'll think about it," she said reluctantly. "But don't get your hopes up." That night, Rachel lay awake, staring at the ceiling as her thoughts swirled. She didn't trust Mark, but she also didn't want to deny Ethan the chance to know his father. The next day, Rachel confided in Nathaniel about what had happened. She hadn't planned to tell him, but when he asked why she seemed distracted, the words just spilled out. "I don't know what to do," she admitted, her voice heavy with emotion. "Ethan deserves to know his father, but what if Mark just hurts him the way he hurt me?" Nathaniel listened quietly, his expression thoughtful. "You're a good mother, Rachel," he said after a moment. "You'll do what's best for Ethan. But don't let Mark back into your life unless he's willing to prove he's changed." Rachel nodded, grateful for Nathaniel's advice. She hadn't expected him to care so much, but his words gave her the clarity she needed. A few days later, Rachel allowed Mark to meet Ethan under her supervision. Ethan was hesitant at first, but his natural curiosity soon took over, and he began asking Mark questions about his life. Rachel watched from a distance, her heart aching as she saw the cautious hope in Ethan's eyes. But as the weeks went on, Mark's true colors began to show. He started missing scheduled visits, making excuses about work and other commitments. Rachel's worst fears were confirmed when she overheard him on the phone, complaining about how hard it was to be a father. When Mark failed to show up for Ethan's school play, a performance Ethan had been excited about for weeks, Rachel knew she had to put an end to it. She confronted Mark outside the apartment, her voice firm and unwavering. "You don't get to come in and out of Ethan's life whenever it's convenient for you," she said. "He deserves better than that. We deserve better than that." Mark tried to argue, but Rachel didn't back down. "If you can't commit to being a real father, then stay out of his life," she said, her voice breaking. "I won't let you hurt him the way you hurt me." As Mark walked away, Rachel felt a mix of relief and sadness. She had done what was best for Ethan, but it still hurt to see the man she had once loved walk away again. That evening, when Rachel returned to the Carter estate, Nathaniel noticed the sadness in her eyes. "Rough day?" he asked gently. Rachel nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I'll be okay. I always am." Nathaniel didn't say anything, but the look in his eyes told Rachel that he understood, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel so alone. The days after Mark's departure were bittersweet for Rachel. While she felt relief knowing she had protected Ethan from further disappointment, there was still a lingering sadness. She had hoped, deep down, that Mark might have truly changed for Ethan's sake, if not for hers. But now, she knew she couldn't rely on anyone but herself to give her son the life he deserved. At the Carter estate, Rachel found herself leaning more on her growing connection with Nathaniel. Their conversations had become more frequent, more personal. Nathaniel, who had once been so cold and distant, now seemed to genuinely care about Rachel and her struggles. And in turn, Rachel found herself caring deeply about him, not just as her employer, but as a man who had endured so much pain and yet was still trying to find his way back to life. One afternoon, as Rachel was helping Nathaniel with his physical therapy, he broke the silence with a question that caught her off guard. "Rachel," he said, his voice softer than usual, "what do you want for yourself?" She paused, her hands stilling as she adjusted the brace on his leg. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you spend so much time taking care of everyone else. Ethan, me. Do you ever think about what you want? Your dreams?" Rachel blinked, the question stirring something deep inside her. "I don't know," she admitted after a moment. "I guess I've spent so long just trying to survive that I haven't really thought about it. My only dream has been to give Ethan a better life." Nathaniel nodded, his expression thoughtful. "You deserve more than just surviving, Rachel. You deserve to live, to dream." His words stayed with her long after their session ended. That night, as she tucked Ethan into bed, she found herself thinking about the life she wanted not just for her son, but for herself. She realized that somewhere along the way, she had forgotten how to dream. The next day, Nathaniel surprised her again. As she entered his study to check on him, she noticed something different. The grand piano in the corner, which had been silent for so long, was open, its keys gleaming in the sunlight. "You played," she said, her voice filled with quiet amazement. Nathaniel glanced at the piano, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "I did," he admitted. "It felt good, like I was finding a piece of myself again." Rachel smiled, her heart swelling with pride for him. "I'm glad," she said softly. "You should keep playing. You're good at it." Nathaniel looked at her, his blue eyes filled with something she couldn't quite name. "You've helped me more than you know, Rachel," he said. "I don't think I would have started playing again if it weren't for you." Rachel felt her cheeks flush, but before she could respond, Nathaniel continued. "I've been thinking," he said, his tone more serious now, "about the estate, about what I want to do with it." Rachel tilted her head, curious. "What do you mean?" "For years I've let this place become a prison," Nathaniel said, gesturing to the grand but empty room around them. "But it doesn't have to be. I used to dream of turning it into something meaningful, a place where people could come together, celebrate life, and create memories. I think I want to try again." Rachel's eyes widened. "That's a beautiful idea, Nathaniel. You should do it." He smiled, a genuine, hopeful smile that lit up his face in a way Rachel hadn't seen before. "I can't do it alone," he said. "I'll need help, someone who understands people, who knows how to make things happen." Rachel's breath caught as she realized what he was saying. "Me?" "Yes, you," Nathaniel said firmly. "You've brought life back into this house, Rachel, into me. I can't think of anyone better to help me bring this dream to life." Tears pricked at Rachel's eyes, but she quickly blinked them away. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Say yes," Nathaniel said, his voice gentle but insistent. Rachel looked at him, her heart full. For the first time in years, she felt like she was standing at the edge of something new, something full of possibility. "Yes," she said finally, a smile breaking across her face. "I'll help you." In that moment, Rachel realized that this wasn't just a new beginning for Nathaniel. It was a new beginning for her, too. Together, they were stepping into a future that neither of them had dared to dream of before. The transformation of the Carter estate was nothing short of remarkable. Over the next few months, Rachel and Nathaniel worked side by side to bring his vision to life. The once quiet halls of the mansion were filled with the sounds of laughter, music, and life. Nathaniel's dream of turning the estate into a community space, a place for celebrations, art, and connection, was for Rachel. It was more than just a job. It was a chance to rediscover herself, to dream again. She found joy in the work, in the people she met, and in the growing bond she shared with Nathaniel. He had gone from being her employer to her partner in every sense of the word. Ethan, too, thrived in this new chapter of their lives. He loved exploring the estate, making friends with the staff, and even learning to play the piano under Nathaniel's patient guidance. Watching her son laugh and grow in a way she had always dreamed of filled Rachel's heart with gratitude. One evening, as the sun set over the estate, Rachel and Nathaniel stood together on the balcony, looking out at the vibrant scene below. Families were gathered on the lawn, children were playing, and the sound of music drifted through the air. "You did it," Rachel said, glancing at Nathaniel. "No," he replied, his voice warm. "We did it." Rachel smiled, her heart full. For the first time in years, she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. This story is a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there is always hope. Healing takes time, but with the right people by your side, anything is possible. Thank you so much for watching this heartfelt story on Emma's Stories. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more inspiring tales about life, love, and second chances, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Your support helps us continue sharing these meaningful stories with you. And remember, here on Emma's Stories, every story has the power to touch a heart and change a life. See you in the next video.